All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krista Van Hove. I am a campus planner at Stanford University and the president of the Northern California ASLA chapter. On behalf of the chapter, thank you for joining us today for Lunch with Leaders, Industry Icons. We are honored to have Angela Dye with us today to share about advocacy, large and small. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you are comfortable, please turn on your cameras. We'd love to see your faces after a long year in quarantine. Number two, for those who want to know who is on the executive committee, you will see an ASLA-NCC in front of their names. And just a reminder that our call for nominations for the 2021 and 22 executive committee is out now and is open. The deadline to nominate yourself or a colleague is April 30th. And our last reminder is please utilize the chat function within Zoom to send any questions you might have during the presentation. Laura, can you pull up the slide? Thank you. As you've seen in emails and the chapter social media channels, this lecture series has been going on since summer of 2020. If you missed any of them and want to see our past webinars, you can find those on our chapter's website or our YouTube channel. We are more than halfway through our current lineup and we'll be hosting our end of the year lineup soon. But coming up next on May 5th at 5 p.m., note the time difference, it won't be at lunchtime, is Kona Gray, a principal at EDSA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This lecture will be hosted in partnership with the Stanford Architecture, Landscape, and Urban Design Spring Lecture Series. The theme for the series this year is the public realm. I will drop the link for the full series in the chat, and we will send out the registration link for that lecture soon. And then in June, we will also welcome June Grant, founder of Blink Lab in Oakland. So stay tuned for those announcements. Before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I'd like to turn the mic over to one of our executive committee members, Blake Sanborn, who is on the Sustainability and Stewardship Committee for a brief announcement.
Perfect. Thank you, Krista. And I'm looking forward to the lecture, so I won't take too much time, but I did just want to share a little bit about one of our initiatives that's kicking off that might involve some support from you all and others. So let me just share my screen. So roughly 50% of our urban environments are usually dedicated to cars. And one of the initiatives that we're kicking off this year in the Northern California chapter of ASLA is to find promise amid the pandemic landscape. And we want to celebrate the places that have emerged for people during this period. And we want to bring together those different open spaces by collecting those images and photos. And so the request is to work with our members and others who have taken photos during this period. And ASLA is going to combine those and celebrate some of the successes that have really been the result of a lot of creativity and dedication amid our community. And the hope is that some of these spaces that were initially temporary may in fact become more permanent fixtures in our urban public realms. So some examples that you may be familiar with are slow streets, or maybe you were on an exercise class or taking advantage of some of the art installations that have popped up like this one in Golden Gate Park, or had the opportunity to enjoy a socially distanced outing during this period. We think that the public realm is part of a resilience strategy, and we want to document that so that moving forward, our communities are more resilient than ever. So if you're willing or interested in participating, I'll drop into the chat a link to the website, which looks like this. And if you have images of these places that you've been fortunate enough to visit, there's an easy icon that you click on and you're able to then upload your image. And there's just a couple of simple questions. So we would love for you to participate and spread the word. I'll drop the link into the chat. And if you have any questions, just let us know.
Great, thank you, Blake. And this is an effort we are excited to involve our friends and family in, so don't feel like it's limited to just people in landscape architecture. Okay. All right, so today we have the pleasure of listening to Angela Dye, who is a fellow with the ASLA. She is a licensed landscape architect in Arizona and Colorado with a master's in landscape architecture and community development and planning from the University of Colorado, Denver. She founded ADI Design in 1998 in Phoenix, Arizona, as an urban design planning landscape architecture firm. The firm completed projects as diverse as the Metro Light Rail Station design, Phoenix Convention Center, and Red Rock Scenic Byway near Sedona, Arizona, the Camelback Pedestrian Underpass in Phoenix. The firm has resided in Telluride, Colorado since 2010, where she has diversified her practice to residential design and the visual arts. She is a past president for the American Society of Landscape Architects in 2008 and 2009, and she is currently a chair of the Town of Telluride Open Space Commission, a member of the Telluride Planning and Zoning Commission, and a San Miguel County Open Space Commission. Her most recent work includes 2 cultural landscape inventories and reports at the Grand Canyon National Park for the National Park Service. She volunteers as a DJ for KOTO, Telluride's community radio, as Lady Di. She also does fiber artwork through the AHA School for the Arts in Telluride. I've had the privilege of knowing Angela since I was a junior in high school. She was the first landscape architect I ever met and welcomed me into her firm for a week-long shadowship where I fell in love with landscape architecture as a profession. If it weren't for Angela's enthusiasm for the profession and her engagement in the local community, I would not be standing before you today. So I give you a big thank you, Angela, for being a great mentor and always leading by example. Your contributions to the profession go beyond landscape architecture and are making positive, lasting impacts in our world. On behalf of the chapter, please welcome my muse and mentor, Angela Dye.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you, Krista. Appreciate that. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. All right, so I'm standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon. Not really, but this is this is one of those cultural landscape reports I was able to do. It's looking down on the Colorado River at Toro Weep Overlook, a very frequently photographed but rarely visited spot where you can see the river upstream and downstream. So anyway, so don't worry, I'm not going to fall off the edge. All right, I'm going to start sharing the screen here. Bear with me. I'm going to go full. Come on. Oops. Nope. That's a little preview, sorry. Let's start at the beginning. All right, thank you. I actually recognize some familiar names on the attendance list, but welcome to everyone. My discussion today is really more of a personal look at the profession and the opportunities that have come to me. But I want to first thank you all for the invitation. It's great, Krista and the rest of the chapter for inviting me, and happy World Landscape Architecture Month. This is a snapshot of the beginning and the current here. I was born in Regensburg, West Germany at the time. which is the shot on the left, and apparently at 6 months was already a budding landscape architect. It must have been Easter. I was, yes, president of ASLA from 2008 to 2009, but currently I am a DJ, which is very fun, every other Sunday, 4 to 6. And I live in a very wonderful town we'll learn a little bit more about later. And it can be quite exciting sometimes. That's an annual shot of an avalanche giving way at the end of the valley. So here are some of the particulars. We mentioned some of the work, but I did get a master's in landscape architecture and planning from Denver. So I have the University of Colorado, Denver. So I have a little bit of basis in the West from longstanding. And by the way, that's a picture of Wilson Peak, which is what you see on the Coors beer can. So advocacy for me has always been apparently something I was doing, but didn't realize I was doing actively. Essentially, just so that we have that as a basis for going forward. It's an activity. In other words, it's action-oriented, aimed to influence decisions. It can be a myriad different kinds of ways. It's also a process of supporting and enabling people to do things, which is really the basis for a lot of what we do as designers and landscape architects. So my intention today is really to talk about some personal discoveries about how that can be done most effectively, a couple of case studies, and I do have some videos, so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. And I'm hoping that you can glean some things from this that might apply if you're starting out, if you're in mid-career, or looking long-term. So personal, I divide this into personal and public, really. Personal advocacy, I think, really comes from your roots or your exposure, your travel to different cultures, the physical environment, of course, that you live in. And for most of the LAs that I've met, they always have this moment of nature that they relate to somehow that got them to think about and discover landscape architecture as a profession. Also, heightened awareness of your surroundings and what's important to you. And for me, it distilled to protecting the natural environment and helping people fit into their environment better, that I could be a part of that. So some personal influences for me as I was growing up. My folks were both in the Marines during World War II. After that, my father became a career military in the Army. So, but it was in a climate of social change, not unlike today. Unfortunately, we were living a little bit of that, but it was definitely conflict. So I had to kind of decide where I was. The other major personal influence was a grounding in the West. When we were stateside, we had a cabin in Montana. So big open spaces, lots of mountains, and it really gave me that personal value of an appreciation of landscape. I really like rocks, and I like mountains. So cheers. We are going to celebrate a little bit of that. But essentially, I didn't realize it at the time, but it's a natural response. Humans need that connection to nature, just as Flo. He put it very succinctly in 1865. Oh my goodness. Anyway, he had it dialed in. So the types of advocacy, like I mentioned, personal is an expression of your own values. Public, the way we do it as landscape architects is often through influencing the design of projects. And of course, participating and collaborating. That's a part very much of lending your voice to the situation at any time in your career or after. If any of you done Pechacucha, 20 slides, 20 seconds a slide, one of those actor studio preface questions is, what's your motto? Well, I never really had one, but I had to think of one because I've done a couple of those. And for me, it was making a difference. I was always trying to make a meaningful contribution, mentoring others, trying to recognize the need that I saw, apply skills that I had learned, and trying to learn from others. Sometimes it wasn't always the happiest relationship, but we know how that goes. But overall, it was with this kind of intention, and I'm sure you can relate to that in your own situations. How is it that you came to be a landscape architect? What is valuable to you? So this is a bit of a pep talk. I noticed some folks, I think from Phoenix here. This is what came to be the need that I recognized in Phoenix, where I was living at the time. This is how people in Phoenix find shade. Behind a telephone pole or a traffic signal, whatever they can find. This is done by a friend of mine, Kevin Peterson, who's an architect, quickly sketched, but very apropos. So it became my mantra to look for ways to provide shade, and not just in a horticultural sense, but also in an architectural sense. Wherever people had shade, they gathered, and that made a city more vital, and people fit into their urban environment more comfortably. So my advocacy through design started with the enhancements, but we call those multimodal design because they're not enhancements, they're part of what we do. As humans, we need all of those modes of transportation. Meaningful transit, not just the transit by necessity, but transit as a choice. Public spaces and public works. And I'll give you a few examples, and I'm hoping that everyone can think of examples where maybe they have applied their advocacy, their values in the work that you have done. Some spectacularly, some quietly. All is contributing to our work as landscape architects. In this case, this is a neighborhood where it was adjacent to ASU in Tempe, Arizona. Cut through traffic was driving everybody crazy, becoming very dangerous. The city itself actually had some very forward-thinking folks on staff and said, we're going to do this. We're going to throw any method of traffic calming that you can think of and see if we can get the daily traffic from 10,000, which doesn't sound very much, but down to 5,000 because it's next to a park, school, elementary school. So we've got public art, the separation of different modes, bikes, people, and creating a much better place. Public art being a major component moving forward on most of these projects. And then the urban intervention aspect. Krista mentioned the Camelback Road underpass, pedestrian underpass. We called it an undercrossing because we didn't want it to be perceived as a tunnel, but essentially people were not making across this street. You can see how wide it is. We had two major destinations. It was a setup for conflict. Shopping on one side, hotels, offices on the other. Huge issue in the city of Phoenix, in a very upscale neighborhood, and people would take their lives in their hand, and frankly, some did not make it. I think 3 people were killed. But none of these projects, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, is done alone. It's done as a team, whether you have the public, you have the businesses, or you have a team of people who can bring other skills. In this case, I am being flanked by Kevin and other folks, the civil engineer, the public artists. We're trying to figure out where to put it and if it's going to go up and over or under. And as it turned out, we kind of did the thing in the middle, which where we went a little up with the road and a little down with the underpass, because the fundamental reason was to try to get people to use it. So here it is under construction. you can see AMC Theater. I'm not even sure if it's there anymore. I think it's evolved, but office space. And what landscape architects, I think, tend to do that is we don't recognize enough in the public is that we tend to look at the big view. So in the lower left there, it wasn't just about getting across the road. It was what do you do from one major intersection to the other. We think about the entire environment. And that's how we really influence and advocate for the best solution. Moving on to light rail. I give this as an example to have everyone recognize the gravity of the situation. We were going to be placing people in the middle of the street. You can see some of those temperatures, the different degrees of sunlight. Lowest angle sun at August 21st at 5 o'clock. We're putting people in the middle of the street. A traditional transit stop was not, a transit shelter design was not going to work. So this was the need, and the designers needed to come up with the appropriate solution. In this case, the transit agency was very forward thinking. Again, if you don't have a good client, you're not necessarily going to have a good project. I think they go hand in hand. That's been my experience. But they got 5 different architectural teams together to say, here, solve this problem. Again, a team effort. Can't do it without other expertise. And this was the chosen solution. So in that low angle sun I mentioned, you've got a place of refuge, both from an architectural standpoint, but also from a landscape perspective, adding something green to the mix. And frankly, I credit Krista's father, who worked for Valley Metro, for adding that component. It needed to be a kit of parts because every situation was a little bit different. Of course, it had to have public art, but this is one of the results at one of the stations. You can see for the 10 minutes that people need to wait, at least they have some kind of refuge. A colossal team effort. Civil engineers, architects, but also electrification engineers, systems engineers, the full gamut in order to make this work. And COVID aside, it's been incredibly successful in a desert city. Can't happen by itself. The other thing about collaboration is don't be afraid, and I'm sure many of you have had the chance to do this, to collaborate with other people. That means other professionals as well. In this case, the Phoenix Convention Center, I was teamed with another local landscape architecture firm, Christy Tonight. I'm sure you've heard of Tonight Associates, now in Texas. But we were able to not just go through the design process on a very complex and tight schedule, but change the urban design of this part of the city of Phoenix. That's another way to advocate. So the collaboration, I can't stress collaboration enough in this. Advancing sustainable design, another example. City of Tempe, also very forward thinking to initiate a green roof as long as they were doing a public building at a transit stop that became also a transfer center for buses. And an example that you can see from Tempe Butte of a green roof. And I think I saw Steve Lowhide on the list, and he's in the photograph on the left with the black umbrella. And of course, ASLA. We've been advancing as a profession, largely because we have an organization, a society that advocates for the profession, but not just that, but positive change, and knows that we are, if we're part of the mix, can make a big difference, that we can provide leadership and take on some of the big issues of the day. We also like to reward folks for doing good work. You may recognize some of these people. Some of them, I think, in the left are from California. The other couple of things I'm really proud of for ASLA during my tenure was the advancement of the green roof at ASLA HQ. This was the office building before. Some of you probably seen these slides ad nauseum, but I still think it's an important thing to remember that this was a huge step and a huge financial commitment for the society. Twin office buildings, the one on the right is the one we own. I hope that if you haven't been there, you will. And in 3 stages of growth, the one on the upper left being initially, a couple seasons later on the right, and as of today. It's a meadow up there. But the great thing about it too is you see the higher buildings around it, they look at it and go, what is that all about? It solves a lot of stormwater issues, starts the conversation. And we didn't stop there, which I want to say is a great thing. We are now Center for Landscape Architecture, and we show how it's done in a complete sense. And one of the opportunities I had when I was president, because there weren't a whole lot, I give staff great credit for trying to figure out something for me to do. We were in a great recession. And what could they do with limited funds? Well, the Park Service was struggling with how to get Congress to recognize that the National Mall needed some work. So here we are, architects, planners, and landscape architects, some of whom you might recognize there, with the folks in the famous hat, looking at the situation on the National Mall under what we call the Blue Ribbon Panel. They gave us a briefing. We walked around, waved our arms, looked at things. And I'm happy to say that some of the solutions have actually been advanced for improving the mall, including that pool you see behind, which has at the time had no recirculation system. So in the summer, in the DC heat and humidity, really became kind of a stagnant mess. So looking at the opportunities that presented, how can we contribute? Incredibly important way in which we can provide leadership. Very happy to be part of that. So a couple of the advancing ideas here I want to share with you do not necessarily involve landscape architects. In this case, these are a couple of inspiring to me case studies, and not necessarily case studies as I present them to you, but they're living, breathing places and ongoing discussions about how to express community values, people getting people to act, and what that means in terms of the roles for landscape architects. I was very happy to be able to participate in this project, but I wanted to present it from the standpoint of the citizens were way ahead of everybody on this one, and they had a reason to be. They were not about to advance what ADOT or DOT was proposing, and that was a 5-lane urban section through and on a scenic byway. This is from the village of Oak Creek to the town of Sedona, city of Sedona, through 2 counties, 2 communities, and national forest. This is the result of the memoir here, but you can see on the left the various different machinations that the public went through, but fundamentally, they as citizens recognized that beauty matters. They were able to say that there has to be another way of doing this. So they did their own research. They voted in a new council. It was a new governor after the previous proposal was not acceptable. And the new team, of which I was proud to be a part, again, another case where you had lots of people on the professional side, trying to give folks every method you can think of to participate. Doing your own, building your own road, if you will, providing for all modes of transportation, listening to the folks with different tours on different subjects, having a website. Again, this is probably, it's got to be 15 years now. That sort of outreach was not common. Now it's commonplace to have all of that. And boy, did they show up. We had hundreds of public meetings at various different stages to distill down the concept that was going to be acceptable. It did end up being multimodal as an opportunity for landscape architects as well as others on the team, civil engineers, traffic engineers, a whole host of folks. We showed them what we could do with their desire to do better, to have a different solution. They didn't know how to do it. They just knew that what was being proposed wasn't what they wanted. But we were able to translate that into something that was much more livable, walkable, usable, and actually added a little more urban design. There wasn't any, to an informal subdivision that had grown up that now is much more of a village. Taking out the traffic signals, and here began ADOT's fascination with roundabouts. For those of you in Arizona, this was a major turning point for ADOT. The roundabout has now become part of their litany of choices to solve traffic problems. I can speak to the lack of carrying capacity on the entire region here. But can you imagine if the 12 roundabouts actually had traffic signals? It did provide, by taking out the traffic signals, an opportunity for public art, for landscape, and elevated the road from an Arizona scenic byway to a national American byway, the highest designation. It was their way that we could translate as professionals their community values into a better place. The second case study I'm going to present, I'm going to ask for Krista to help here. This is where I live, and it's a little background on the valley floor.
Okay, Angela, so just stop sharing and then I can share the video.
Yeah.
Conrad's a really special place. And no matter how long you've lived here, every time you come back, you drive into this valley and say, what an amazing place.
Most people who've been here for any length of time, they remember their first trip up the canyon, and it's one of those things that stays with you and is behind the love affair that we have for the landscape here.
You see this peaceful landscape that is preserved for wildlife and for the environment. It really sets the tone for what Telluride is.
It sort of defines who we are. We love the outdoors here. This is what we respect.
The town really began talking about the valley floor back in the 70s in terms of wanting to protect this area.
A lot of us, didn't want to see the valley floor taken over with high-rise condos and galloping development. We really wanted to have that incredible gateway that looks up into the mountains and takes you beyond Telluride and up into the slopes.
Fortunately, a lot of the citizens had the vision to think in terms of, we're going to grow, we're going to develop more. We have one shot, we need to do it correctly.
In putting that master plan together, we identified the valley floor as the top priority for protection, much to the consternation of San Miguel Valley Corp.
There were noises being made about developing the valley floor. So people were becoming aware that, there was a threat there.
San Miguel Valley Corporation, the owner of the valley floor, went to Mountain Village with a proposal to annex to Mountain Village. And that's when the public got very upset about the potential for development in the valley floor and knew that we needed to galvanize an effort to preserve it. July 5th, 2000, we held the Rally for the Valley, and we didn't know how many people would show up. We thought it might be a little meager, just a few of us walking out there, but it turned out to be 1,500 people held hands and walked out to the valley floor as a show of solidarity, of intention that we wanted that land preserved.
People began to realize we have an opportunity. It would be great if we could do it cooperatively with the owner, and if not, we can do that. But people were willing to make that happen.
Like making of sausage and passing bills in Congress, this was not a pretty 3.5 years.
I remember John Pryor, as mayor, talked to the owners and came up with a compromise that would have given all of the valley floor and 9 or 10% of the land base would have been in development. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. We took it to the people, and the people said no.
This was a situation where compromise was not an option in my mind.
It seemed so obvious, and yet we were up against, this big corporation who actually owned the land, and most of us are familiar with trying to solve problems like that through zoning, not by just saying, well, then let's just buy it.
In 2003, we filed a condemnation action. A condemnation action is a lawsuit, and it's a taking of a piece of property from someone or an entity through a legal process. And we had the right to condemn for schools, transportation, different things. And then at the end it said, and any other purpose that was for the public benefit. So that's the flag that we rode under.
When you go through a condemnation process, the first thing you have to do is have the land appraised, which we did, and came in at, I think, $22 million as an appraisal. And the landowner successfully had the jury trial moved from San Miguel County Court because he thought he couldn't get a fair and unbiased trial here to the Delta County Court.
I was at the hearing, I stepped outside and I called Kodo and I asked them to put me on the radio. And I said, we just finished the appraisal hearing and it's 50 million. And the DJ says, 15? I said, no, 50. He goes, I think he said, oh shit.
And I just collapsed on the floor. I'm like, we've come this far, but we can't do that.
I was devastated. I thought this is the end. But other people didn't. They just were, nope, we're gonna do this.
We had a 3-month timeline. We had to raise $50 million. Half of that, half was bonded in 3 months, and it was a highly stressful time.
We were grasping at ideas and creative ways to be sure that we got the ear of everybody who potentially could be a supporter for us. And they stepped up. We had more than 1,700 donors in the end.
It was like a wave. It just couldn't be stopped. One person would give, they would get their friends of circles to give.
Our idea was, let's just create so much hope that it's so powerful that this will happen.
The community came together as I hadn't seen in 4 decades, and bring me to emotion thinking about the sacrifice that people made to make it happen. It was beautiful.
People ask me now, how did it happen? And my only answer is it was magic. I mean, it all came together.
Though Telluride's more successful than we ever thought it would be, at least we said, wait, there's limits, and just the sense of open space that you can breathe.
Open space is a critical component of quality of life.
Families who you see out there enjoying nature is heartening.
It's funny, I had an amazing situation last night in a bar in Telluride, and a guy sat down next to me. He says, so what do you know about this valley floor? Is it true nothing can ever go out there? I said, yeah, nothing, no permanent structures, it's public access. And he goes, that's amazing. And I looked at him and I said, it's priceless.
About it constantly. Save the valley floor, save the valley floor. It means something to everybody who lives in San Miguel County.
Several times in your discussions you've made reference to the fact that this might happen or that might happen if the community wants it.
Do you want me to cut?
Could you clarify what the community is that you're trying to consider in those kinds of statements? We could probably help you with that.
I hereby proclaim May 9th Valley Floor Day. Today and every May 9th, we celebrate this breathtaking portal that welcomes you to the Telluride Valley, whether for the first time or the millionth. This community has ensured the preservation of this common ground so that we can celebrate and cherish it forever. I'd like to make a toast to all of you to Telluride, this place we call home.
All right, now we're done. All right, so I'm going to get back to sharing here. I'm not sure where we're at. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. Where'd it go? There we go. All right, looks like I gotta go find it.
I can pull it up.
Okay. Here we go. I'll just go to, there we are. All right, so what's amazing about this, I think, is that this was citizen driven. They're not landscape architects. They just intuitively knew that open space was really important. And they took it on. Now we're in a, and by the way, the reference to the Valley cows, the previous owner had a herd of Holstein cattle that they would put on there. And so everybody's dressed as cows. It sort of became the motto or the logo for the Valley floor, and was a rallying cry. They, of course, have gone and been replaced very readily by a herd of elk that like to hang out. So from there, how does this relate to landscape architects? Well, I am privileged to be a citizen of the town of Telluride and now the chair of the Open Space Commission. So it turns my role from a designer to a steward. And because I can run a meeting, I guess they let me stay as the commission chair. But what we do today is just as important. We have two preserves, Bear Creek Preserve and the Valley Floor. They're both under conservation easements. So we look at compliance, we have a management plan, we have an annual work plan for both of them. We do noxious weed pulls, which you see on the right there. We go up to Bear Creek, we saw a huge avalanche. You leave a lot of avalanche damage, that's on the left. And when I can, I contribute whatever skills I can to doing trail realignments and that sort of thing. But the major focus has been stewardship, for monitoring what's going on. And in this case, it's about doing the right thing and undoing some things that were done in the past. So we're going to share another video with you.
Just a quick time check, Angela. We have 10 minutes, so.
Yeah. So this I think will, sorry, we have, may not have a lot of Q&A. We can look at this later. I can describe it. We can just go back to the final part of the presentation, Krista, if you prefer.
Sorry, one second.
So why don't I just go back to the presentation here. And so we're looking at, full screen. We're looking at the changing of the alignment of the river. There are mine tailings on this land from the mine at the upper end of the valley there, left. And on the left, you'll see of the bigger picture, you'll see bare ground. That's mine tailings. So we are moving the river channel where it flows next to that and takes those mine tailings away on a regular basis, moving it over to a different channel on the right and drying up the one on the left, capping those tailings and doing it for water quality purposes, as well as for the betterment of the valley as it returns the river to its river channel. to its floodplain, I should say. Here you can see, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but the new water is just entering the new channel. And here we're closing off one, and the new one is the one on the right. So just in summary here, I want to emphasize that advocacy is probably something you have been doing on a regular basis. I want to strengthen that approach. I want to give you some resolve to continue what you're doing with all the things that landscape architects do, which we listen very well. We're obviously the connective tissue between the engineering and the architecture oftentimes, because we listen and we pull things together. We also have an awareness of our environment, and hopefully all of you maintain some perspective and some awareness of your environment, as well as the context in which your work is done, and help convey that to the team, because it is a team effort. Engineers are taught differently, architects are taught differently. We need to bring them all together to understand what the focus is. I know that's part of our training, it's part of our DNA. Never stop learning and have courage, as Sacagawea did. And because there's lots more to do than say. And as your careers evolve, you get to do all kinds of very interesting things, and keep doing it. And I'll see you on the radio.
Great, thanks, Angela. I'll share the video, the other video you have.
Okay, yeah.
If you stop sharing.
This is the Women's March in, I think it was February or March a few years ago, 2017. Gotta have the dogs, gotta have the kids, and a little snow. That's it. Thank you, anyone. If you have some questions, be happy to answer them. I hope that you've learned a little bit about yourselves in this presentation.
There's a question in the chat about what is the theme for your radio program?
Aha. Of course, that's the best question ever. My handle is Lady Di. The name of my show is Pandora's Box, because we live in a box canyon, not far from the old ghost town of Pandora, but also because you're never quite going to know what you're going to hear, but largely jazz and world music.
That's
So
really
tune in.
exciting. Does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to ask them out loud since we have a small group here.
Yeah. How is Telluride dealing with affordability? I hear from Tom Papadino. Hi, Tom. Well, the town builds a lot of its own employee housing in order to create affordable places for folks to live. It's easy to move there and get a job, but if you can't get a job, you don't have a place to stay. So that's sort of the bottom line. And that's obviously becoming much more acute even before COVID, but now that's even more important. Affordable housing is a part of the real estate transfer tax. About 3% of the sales goes into paying for all kinds of things, because we grow from a community of 2,300 to 15,000, depending on the festival or during the ski season. So we have a huge bed base, but the challenge these days is to create enough housing for the workforce. Most everyone lives down valley, is often the case. The smaller communities outside of the major draw are the ones that absorb a lot of the housing, but that's a commute. So we have built, since I moved there in 2010, we count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different housing projects within town. They might be mixed use, vertical mixed use with, for instance, the AHA School for the Arts is on the lower floor and 10 housing units are constructed above that with a parking structure underneath, below grade, or a could be a lottery system for deed restricted housing or rental housing. We have a boarding house, 3 tiny homes. They were an experiment. The lottery for rental, of course, very high. We need to now, in our oldest housing project, have to replace one of those complexes because obviously they get a lot of hard use. But yeah, we're still about 400 units short. The town of Mountain Village, which is on the other side of the mountain by gondola, is building their own housing as well. They're at the base of the ski area. So it's a regional effort, oftentimes on county land with the town of Telluride or town of Mountain Village building, having the organizational skills. So it is a challenge, huge challenge. I saw a question come up about consensus. Let me go to the chats here.
Yeah, do you have any tips for building consensus during the outreach process?
Yeah, give people a chance to talk. I think that was what, in the case of 179 in Red Rock country, ADOT wasn't listening. And so it created a huge debacle politically. But however, you know, the public generally, they didn't know what they wanted. So they ended up educating themselves on traffic calming and multimodal design. And the way that we achieved consensus was give them some choices, give them a way to understand what the challenges were, but give them choices about what different designs, give them alternatives. Engineers are great at, you know, doing stuff, but they stand behind their, you know, and basically hide behind, I would say, a lot of their numbers. They don't recognize the humanity of what they're creating, of what people have to live with. And so a more comprehensive effort, that's what the way they're trained. It's, you know, that's our challenge with them, to understand how to bring different viewpoints together is not a challenge to them being an engineer, it's part of the process. We're much better at doing that. So in the way that we did various different ways in which to get folks to understand what the choices were, because there were choices. The 4-lane or 2-lane, no, there were actually a lot more subtleties to that. We brought them through that process. And that's actually what made a successful project, I think.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. I think that's all the questions in the chat. And we're at our time today too. And so I feel like after your presentation today, the 2 words I would use to describe you are fearless pioneer. And so thank you so much for your contributions and just living like you want to see the world. And I think that's really inspiring. I had one last question for you. You know, you mentioned a little bit about collaboration and working with other professions. 2-part question. Who are our advocates that already exist out there that we can partner with? And then who also do you think we need to improve relationships with to, I guess, see the more work of landscape architecture out there?
Well, you know, in a place like Telluride, just as a sample, it's a resort town. people value the out of doors. They value public lands. So they're automatically advocates for being out there and appreciating the landscape in the larger context. So they're automatically allies. I think the challenge becomes helping people in other, say, rural areas or other very special areas that's in fact something they can and should advocate for. So we need, I think, to build advocates from folks who already appreciate the landscape in different ways. Ranchers, for instance, while they make a living off the land, they also appreciate the landscape usually that they live in. But things have become so polarized that they wouldn't necessarily consider themselves advocates. But when you say in a land trust, you put them in a situation where their family could benefit from that easement because it can stay in the family for those who want to continue ranching, then that gives them an incentive to save a lifestyle as well as the landscape, and that becomes a paired motive together. As far as who do you think we should reach out to? Was that the second part of the question?
Yeah, or who maybe do we need to repair relationships with or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think it comes down to basic values. And if we understand people's motivation for why they are so adamant about a certain position, it may be that we find common ground. We have to get beyond, frankly, all the layers of crap to get to what's really meaningful for folks. And if we don't listen, that's why fundamentally listening is very important. I think we need to listen better and get to the bottom line. And I think if we can get to, why do people live in a certain place? What do they find valuable? It's going back to the whole neighborhood involvement thing where you put out the map of the neighborhood and say, okay, where are your favorite places and what's wrong with things? And what would you do? Even though they are not professionals, they have an opinion and we know how to pick up on some of that. They can generate some of that on their own very well. And I hope that I've given everybody the right pep talk so they can go do it.
Yes, happy World Landscape Architecture Month, everybody. And tune in with us tomorrow night for our annual awards ceremony at 6:30 tomorrow night.
Wonderful. Thanks, Krista, and thanks everyone for attending. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.